right. Hello. Nice to meet you all. I think you can hear me. Hi, Michael.
Hi,
it's
Jen.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, you as well.
I'm very excited to get to talk to you. I have read your very impressive LinkedIn bio and your bio on the NRG website, and I think we're in for a real treat to get to learn about all the initiatives that you have going on over there. So I hope that you can just give us a quick snapshot of the company and your role there.
Sure. So NRG is a Fortune 500 company. We're probably in that Fortune 150 to Fortune 175, about 20 billion in revenue. Hopefully all of you know us through some of our brands like Reliant Energy here in Houston, Zero, Direct Energy. We employ probably 3,500 folks in the greater Houston area. We're headquartered here in Houston. We own and operate power plants throughout Texas and in a couple other places. And then we have a large natural gas business, and we have about 6 million customers across the United States and Canada now.
And Canada, so you're international now.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well.
So looking back to the beginning of the pandemic, can you tell us about how you kind of oversaw redefining jobs and according to how they had to be performed now and how you organize management teams to make these decisions?
Yeah, so it was pretty interesting. So we immediately formed, we were no different than most everybody else. So we sent virtually everybody home in March of 2020. Mm-hmm. Before I directly answer the question, it's important to note, so all of the men and women that work at our power plants, they never went remote. You can't operate a power plant remotely. So they have been coming to work every day since the pandemic began, no different than any other day. And I will tell you that through some extraordinarily diligent work by our safety, HR, and then the operations management team, we have, through contact tracing, we only had 2 documented cases of COVID-19 transmission at the power plants, which is incredible for all these people, 1,800 people going in every day.
Right.
So what we did on the office side, we sent everybody home. We were 95+% remote. Mm-hmm. We immediately formed 2 committees thinking that we were gonna address it from the crisis standpoint, and then what does the future look like? So we formed RTNO, Return to Normal Operations Committee, and then Workplace 2021. I will tell you that we have, yeah, fair, okay. So we all made a pact, like stacked hands, we will never put a year in the committee ever again. Yeah. So, cause we're still, it's like Workplace 2027. So, RTNO handles, so what do we do? How do we manage it? Signage, what do the offices look like? We have to measure all the desks. Are they 6 feet apart? So RTNO, and then what should our policies and procedures be? Workplace 2021 kicked off about 6 months after return to normal operations. That they were focused on, okay, once the crisis ends, we're still going to be in a situation, but what does work look like? Mm-hmm. They were the ones, Workplace 2021 went out and hired a consultant. We brought in a bunch of high potential employees from across the organization to say, okay, what do you want? Let's go research what things look like. And I sat on both committees so that we had a level of connection between the two. And then we implemented a lot of the recommendations.
Okay. And so in what ways did you have to consider inclusivity in the process?
So, I would say the biggest challenge was figuring out what we call the segmentation. So taking a fresh look at every job across the enterprise outside of the power plants and say, can that job work? Does that person need to be in the office most of the time, some of the time, or can they really be in the office none of the time and work fully remote? And so from an inclusivity standpoint, I think we took a fresh look at each job and tried to be honest with ourselves about, well, okay, I understand that they have been in the office full-time all the time previously, but is that really necessary, on a go-forward basis?
So in that realm, you created a new employee handbook focused on workplace norms for the new environment, and you sought out diverse voices to assemble it. Can you tell us a little bit about this process and maybe give an example of these new norms?
Yeah, so maybe just to take a step back so that you have some context for how many people are sort of working remotely and not. I mean, we ended up changing so that we had fully on-site, fully remote, hybrid 1 to 2 days a week, hybrid 3 to 4 days a week. The idea was we were roughly, based upon anecdotal data, card swipes, and surveys, we were averaging about 80% occupancy in an office environment on any given workday in any given month of the year. So, broad average. The idea was to cut it in half. So we would be at roughly 40% occupancy. And then you think about a X and Y axis. So on one axis is how often do you come in the office? And the other axis is what kind of seat do you have? So irrespective of whether you're, hybrid, how often you're hybrid, do you have a guaranteed seat, a shared seat, or a hotel seat? And so we did that as well. The norms document was sort of, it's no different. I mean, we all had the same experience. Is it okay to call somebody on your team at 7:30 at night or at 7:30 in the morning? So the norms document was meant to address things like if you normally went out for a walk at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the office, had a cup of coffee with a colleague, walked around the block or whatever, and came back 45 minutes later, that should be just as acceptable if you're working from home than if you're at an office. And so managers had to be told, just because somebody doesn't answer the phone, right? They're not at their desk. Right. No different than not at their desk at the office.
Right.
But I'll give you one good example from the norms. So one of the norms was, and the committees sort of discussed this, and when do you have to have your camera on? What is the expectation for having a camera on? And what they came up with was if there's less than, the recommendation, right? These aren't laws. If there's less than 12 people on the call, it's suggested that you have your camera on. If there's more than 12 people on the call and you're speaking, it's polite to turn your camera on when you're speaking, but you don't need it on all the time.
Yeah, we might need to adopt those rules for classes at University of Houston. Okay, so in what ways have you educated the employees around remote work expectations so you've already kind of talked about that, but so that they also have a sense of being heard and feeling included and like they belong, rather than feeling kind of constantly isolated and alienated?
Yeah, I think we tried to address that through a combination of connection with the broader sort of mothership, as well as training. So the connection, we tried to communicate both from a cadence perspective and then a variety perspective. So sort of regular, every so often we're doing, whether it was a video, a live presentation, a video recording from the CEO, a newsletter, something that came out on Teams. So a wide different variety of ways, but then the cadence was really, if we hadn't, sent something out in 2 weeks, then it was time to send something out, even if it was just, hey, pay attention to self-care, pay attention to your family, make sure they're getting everything they need. If you need something in support of your team, here's where to go, here's the training and the toolkits. And then so with the training side of it, the thinking was anytime we did any training on anything, we would include a toolkit, a manager's toolkit for people leaders, all levels of the organization. So if we did training on stress, if we did training on teams, if we did training on navigating workplace politics, we would try to include a toolkit that would go along after, so that there would be sort of follow-on learning.
That's excellent. And actually, kind of in preparing for this, I talked with a former student of mine who works in the digital media part of NRG Energy, and I kind of asked her, like, what's it been like? Because the company's really had a nice reputation of implementing remote work, and she said it's been great. Like, we had these quarterly virtual lunches with our CEO Elizabeth Killinger, and she said, and normally I wouldn't get access to talk to her. But every quarter we got to do that and do breakout sessions. And she said we had access to a meditation app, and then they would send us lunch to do these things. And it was just, she said it's been wonderful working here during this kind of difficult time. So, I think it's a real accolade, especially for someone who's kind of like newer in their career.
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to give people some tools, but to not. It's a hard line. I mean, it's hard to know, it's like poking somebody saying, are you still okay? Are you still okay? And, after you've poked them 9 times, they're probably not okay anymore.
Right.
And so where's that line between sort of making sure you're seeking, some feedback from them, and then, leaving everybody alone for a little bit, because everybody's got the same kind of problems. They have children at home, schools in and out, daycare in and out.
Right, yeah. So again, kind of piggybacking on that, you've mentioned that you're trying to create a culture of transparency and healthy feedback in the company. How are you doing that?
Yeah, so part of the cadence, I would say, in terms of just not just us putting out content to employees, but there was a real cadence around seeking feedback. So the idea was, and again, also on the variety, so not to issue a 30-question survey, but maybe we'll do a 2-question survey, a pulse survey. Then we'll go out to something that's more focused on well-being, and then maybe there'll be a couple questions around your home work environment from a safety, like do you have a bunch of wires all sticking out? Is everything stuck into one power cord? But then the feedback part of it is the commitment from us to the employees was, hey, if we're going to ask a question, our sort of promise is you get all the responses. Like whatever we ask, we then come back to you and say, here's what the responses were, good, bad, indifferent. And so the context of a feedback culture was sort of a commitment. We'd really appreciate it if you answer the question. In response, we'll commit to you that you get all the answers back to you in a timely fashion, and that we try to listen. So the best example, the recent example, is a memo we issued, what's today? Yesterday. So we acquired, many of you know Direct Energy, a big Houston company that we acquired them about a little bit over a year ago. They had a number of their folks had a parking stipend. We had not had that at NRG. So when that went away, that caused a lot of consternation for a lot of people who had an expectation that that would continue. It came up through through our surveys, and so we said, okay, well, geez, we didn't budget for that, but what could we do? So we issued a stipend yesterday, told them how it was going to work, and I think people appreciate, when they feel heard.
And when their employer goes an extra step to make their lives a little bit easier. Yeah. Excuse me. So switching gears a little bit, as a company, you've accelerated your initiatives toward diversity, equity, and inclusion policies even before the pandemic. So tell us a little bit about the steps that you've taken.
Yeah, so it's important to start, as important as DE&I is to us. One of the things I always tell the team is that it's very important that we're as humble about it as we could be, because we're at the beginning of our journey. I mean, we've been sort of attacking it for the last 3 years, I would say, really, since in earnest in 2018 we started, and we're at the beginning, right? There's companies that are a lot more mature than us, so it's good to have a little humility about all this and realize that it's not something you can just like, yeah, we're going to do this for a year or two and it's done. So we've done a lot of things. So let's see, in no particular order. So we looked at every single policy and procedure that the company has, and we removed all the masculine and feminine pronouns and replaced those with they to ensure people felt included. We did a pay equity survey, both on gender and race, and committed to do it every 3 years, and share the results with the company. So we did that. We looked at all the job codes at the company, so not titles and positions per se, but job codes. Wherever we had 5 or more job codes, we looked at all the job codes and then said, do they truly need 4-year college degrees? Because just like everything else with grade inflation came degree inflation. And so we went through everything, and where jobs could be repurposed or rethought, they were all rethought, and the education requirements changed. And so those are some larger things. We just started a set of scholarships for 2 local HBCUs that we're partnering with, Prairie View and Texas Southern. So we're excited about those. But then there's like small things, and you shouldn't overlook, well, we shouldn't overlook small things. So we changed the company match. We have a charitable giving organization, and company matches your charitable dollars up to a certain amount, and the threshold for that was $25. And from an inclusivity standpoint, we reduced it to 10.
Great.
And it's not, I mean, that's not a big thing, but you have to think broadly.
Yeah, I mean, again, an employee that's their where they can pay to get to know that their employer backs that. I mean, that's every little bit matters, and that's showing the employee that does matter for the large organization. I kind of want to piggyback a little bit on that, because I was really interested in a lot of you all have a lot of matching programs.
We do.
And so I'm skipping kind of our guide. So I'm not going off topic, but
I memorized the answers in order. You realize that.
So you have a social impact program called Positive NRG, in which hundreds of employees volunteer to help respond to food insecurity. Yeah. So how does that align with NRG's purpose? And how does it boost worker engagement? But I'd also like you to kind of talk about some of the other, volunteerism matching programs that you've forged.
Yeah, so Positive NRG is our charitable giving, philanthropic / culture building organization. The food insecurity that you're referring to was our most recent event, which was in early November. Usually we have Positive NRG Day and Positive NRG Week in the spring, but we moved it to the fall this year to see if we could do more with local organizations, because most of those opportunities are inside, and they're like, yeah, we don't really want 35 strangers coming into our building right now. So that was focused on food insecurity at all of our offices. We had events. So Positive NRG, we have matching programs for volunteer hours. So if you volunteer for a 501c3, you log your time it's all electronic. You can either earn dollars or you can earn additional charitable dollars to be donated. We have the matching program for what you give to those organizations. And then if you sit on the board of a nonprofit, then the company commits to make a certain amount of a contribution to that particular charitable organization. I will say the one thing, the intersectionality between employee engagement and what we're living through on the pandemic is really interesting. So we did multiple events for employee engagement through Positive NRG during the pandemic when people couldn't do it. It was all virtual, right? But anybody who thinks that sending everybody home and everybody working 100% remotely is a free option, it may be a good option, but it's not a free option. The reduction in employee engagement. So we went normally in a normal year, we had roughly 1,400 employees participate in active Positive NRG events. Notwithstanding the amount of publicity, internal publicity that we pushed for our virtual Positive NRG events, we got 400 employees. Wow. It's harder to be engaged if you're not, part of it.
Yeah.
And so it may be a perfectly fine option for some companies. It's just not a free option.
Yeah, and I think that's that's something that other executives across the nation, and the world, really need to consider. But it also doesn't mean that they shouldn't be considering how to keep employees engaged, especially because we're seeing the Great Resignation now.
And it's on us. I mean, we did a virtual Olympics, so where employees got to log on. We used a piece of software, and it generated random teams. So you got to do all these different events with different employees, and it was great. It was the people who participated. It was extraordinarily well received. It was just way fewer than we would typically have in an environment where you have a physical event.
Right. But it sounds like you all have really pivoted in creative ways. So, I applaud you all for that. Kind of going back a little bit, there's a growing public consciousness about the environmental and social aspects of the ESG criteria. As an energy company, what challenges and opportunities do you see in demonstrating to employees and customers who care about these issues that your company is in fact moving toward these efforts?
Yeah, so this is, I will try to be less boring than I have been in this, because it's a really complicated, so most what everybody thinks about in terms of sustainability goals is around carbon and greenhouse gases, right? We own and operate lots of power plants that keep the lights on, and a number of those power plants are fossil-based, and so they emit greenhouse gases. So there's a couple things that we've done. So we were one of the first power companies in the country to establish greenhouse gas reduction goals. Those are what are called Science-Based Targets Initiative goals, SBTI. So when you have SBTI certified goals, it means you have no choice but to affirmatively report on those goals annually, right? You have to report chapter and verse about how you're doing. We also had our goals initially certified to 2 degrees of warming, which at the time was best practices under the Paris Accords. We have recertified our goals for 1.5 degrees of warming, which is now best practices. So all of that is interesting, but boring. And we set a mid-level goal of 2025 for reductions, and then a net zero goal by 2050. The more interesting thing is what we're starting this year. All of that is called Scope 1 emissions. Scope 3 emissions are, so when you buy, hopefully you're a Reliant customer, but when you buy your power from Reliant, there is a carbon footprint to your retail purchase of electricity or natural gas or both. The question for us and the challenge for us is how to quantify your use, your greenhouse gas footprint, and then help you reduce it, right? We have 6 million customers, and you can imagine that all of them want to be told, how can you, they love to be told, here's how you can reduce your carbon footprint. Right. But that is our challenge, that is on us. That's what Scope 3 emissions are called. And it is sort of the journey that we are embarking on over the course of this year to start to do an inventory, to try to figure out what are the carbon, what is the carbon footprint of our customers, and how can we help them, what do they want, and how can we help them get there.
Yeah, it sounds like a significant effort.
It is.
But yeah, I mean, definitely something that, again, the company's really working on improving overall like human and environmental impact. So I'm going to kind of close with this last question that I think is particularly relevant for our audience. It's been widely noted that the events of the past few years have put a greater corporate emphasis on human capital. So how have you seen that manifesting itself in your organization in terms of management focus, changing HR and leadership roles, and any other ways?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be transparent. I mean, we are working our way through this, right? We are trying to figure out, as we pivot to a hybrid work environment, we're starting to bring folks back to that hybrid work environment. What does that look like from both a management perspective? Most importantly, though, what does it look like from an employee journey perspective? From somebody who is remote or hybrid, 1 to 2 days a week, 3 to 4 days a week, what does that journey look like, and how is it different from somebody who might be in the office every day? How do we make sure, look, equal is not possible, but how do we make sure they are both relevant journeys, that they are both, they both have the opportunities, sort of to get to wherever it is that they want to go. Right. But that's really the challenge, and we're working on it.
Yeah. Well, the work that you're doing is inspiring. I think, I hope you all got some good ideas and, have some new initiatives you can take back to your organizations. I know that Michael and I know that we're standing in the way of happy hour right now. So we'll end there, but thank you so much for sharing your time and your perspective and insight with us. I speak on behalf of everyone that this was a really delightful but meaningful conversation. So
thanks, I really appreciate it, Jen.